Good morning. Today I'm joined by Jon Pierre, who is CEO and founder of Geotree, who are pursuing digital MRV technologies. I first met Jon at the Seattle Refi Summit as his company is beginning to explore the exciting world of refi and Web3. I'm extremely grateful to have Jon on the show. He's a very influential and impactful innovator, and having said that, Jon, would you please introduce yourself and tell us, how did you start Geotree? How did you end up here?
Yeah, thanks, Rex. Good to connect again. And I must say kudos, to you for organizing a great community with the Refi Summit. And it was good to bump into you as well at Consensus and other places. So I would definitely say keep that up. And yeah, thanks for having me. As you said, I'm the CEO of Geotree, and we use remote sensing, biogeochemical modeling, data science, as well to provide cost-effective monitoring of nature-based solutions projects for carbon markets globally. So, this really spans forestry, regenerative agriculture, grassland management, blue carbon, and the like. So quite an exciting field, given the huge potential of carbon markets, and as I'm sure many people in the refi community are fully aware of, that's something which is looking to increasingly go on chain as well. So good to be here. So just to give you a bit of background, I guess personally, and that will tie into the story of Geotree. So my background has been, prior to being, with Geotree, and our parent company as well, Manta Labs, has always been in, commodities trading. So I was trading agriculture. Previously, I started off as an intern at Goldman Sachs, traded at Citi, traded at two Goldman spinouts, basically one called Hartree Partners and one called Mercuria. And I was actually using remote sensing to monitor crop production, for example, soybeans in Iowa or corn in Brazil, and then taking a view on the production potential or the yields of the crops, and taking a view on the financial markets. So that's where I saw the huge potential of using these new data sources, like remote sensing, to take a view on the market. And it feels like it's really come full circle now, because now I'm using kind of similar approaches, similar technologies, but in a kind of nascent market, which is the carbon market, where there are huge problems with scaling the upstream, the supply side. There's issues around potentially some of the quality of the carbon credits being generated as well, and some people putting question marks on that. But I do think technology like remote sensing, and hopefully paired with technologies like blockchain technology, could really be something that allows this market to scale going forward and regenerate, let's say, some of the natural ecosystems globally as well. So quite an exciting space to be in, I think. But let's see how it goes.
Very cool. So you're one of the people in refi that's coming at it from the finance angle. The last lady I interviewed, Brianna Walsh from Renium, she was a carbon and energy trader, I believe. So it's interesting to see the different mix of people with their different backgrounds coming into this space. Some are from the builder, programmer side, some are from the sustainability side, and you are from the finance side. When you put all these pieces together, I think that's when you get the real answers. So how does Geotree see this emerging world of energy shortages, Ukraine war? I mean, do you think this is going to have a big impact on what you're doing?
Well, I think one thing it does make people really focused on is, yes, we do need to have potentially a energy transition. People look at the fragility in the system, see the dependency on fossil fuels, and think, okay, maybe we do need to make a move towards renewable or more distributed methods and inputs into our energy mix and system. I think it's so initially, some were fearful that this would, take some of the impetus away from carbon markets, from regenerative finance and the like. But I think, we've seen that even throughout, the situation currently, there has still been a pretty strong focus on that, whole ecosystem, on actually, companies, keeping and making net zero commitments. And also, the offset market and the carbon market being a huge component of that as well. So, I think it's been a wake-up call for many people in terms of, okay, how energy is sourced in the world, our dependence on fossil fuels and the like still. So hopefully it does still as well encourage and inspire another generation to actually go and redesign the system and see how can we actually power society in a way that doesn't mean that war in a particular location mean that the supply chain is threatened. So yeah, I think Rex to answer that question as well. We're going to see how this rolls out in the next 2 years in terms of the second order impacts. But I mean, another impact that I see, because a lot of our work is tied to agriculture as well, is that a lot of countries who are big importers of some of the key crops which are grown in the Black Sea region and the like, which probably is most of the world, to be honest. But particularly in some of the poorer countries in the world, are thinking, okay, we need to actually potentially look at our dependency on these crops. Also, there's a huge push around just putting the climate lens on it, not just climate mitigation, but also adaptation as well. A lot of these countries, their own domestic crops are exposed to climate change in a very direct way. So I think we are going to see, another second order impact where people are going to think about, okay, how can we improve our local production? How can we make sure that it can actually be resilient to climate change in some way? How can we invest in yield in different financial products as well, whether it's insurance, access to credit for farmers? I think there are all these other impacts that we might see as well, but it's still fairly early days in our evolution to make too much of a definitive statement, I guess.
Was there a specific moment you can point to in your financial career where you're like, I am done doing this. I need to get into Web3, or I need to get like, was there something specific that happened that like pulled the trigger on it, or?
Okay, that's a bit of a loaded question as always, but I would say one thing, I don't know if it was the trigger, but it did definitely give some impetus. I do remember I was trading soybeans, which was one of my main markets I was looking at. And this involves quite a lot of, or at least what I was doing, a lot of supply and demand analysis. Like I said, looking at the yields, so predicting the yields using satellite imagery, historical weather data, whatever it is, weather forecasts. That's just the yield component. There's the demand component, there's the acreage component as well. Anyway, so a lot of analysis going in there. And I remember, taking, the London Underground, so the tube, into work, 50-minute ride from my home, coming out, looking on my Bloomberg or my BlackBerry at the time, and the price of soybean was limit down. And I was there thinking, oh, this must be some kind of bug. I might have to call Bloomberg up. There's something wrong with my price feed. And then I saw the headline. It's like, President Trump slaps on some trade war tariffs on China, right? And basically for the next 6 months, a lot of the analysis kind of flew out the window, and the analysis that the market mover was like, President Trump's tweets, right? So I just sat there thinking, I'm there going between tweets and the price of soybeans just ticking up and down. Maybe there's something else I can do with my life.
I'm day trading based on Donald Trump's mood this morning. Like whatever he wakes up feeling at 5 a.m., if he wants to tweet, then and there's no spreadsheet for that one, is there? They didn't.
That was life, that was the soybean market for a while, right? So, yeah, and that does give one, gives you pause of thought and start to think, oh, maybe there are other avenues here, right? So, but I think besides that kind of, let's call that a push factor, I think there's always a pull factor as well, right? I think people, I like to say, someone, we have Web3 now. I remember Web0, right? I'm in my mid-30s. I remember the first laptop or the first computer, we got, and the first, when the first bit of dial-up as well. So I remember Web0, Web1, going into Web2 and Web3. right? And I saw, you know what, they're huge opportunities, right? They're huge opportunities out there, not just in Web 2, but obviously into Web 3. So I've always thought, there's a lot of entrepreneurial kind of opportunities. And that's why I got it in Manta Labs, which, is using remote sensing, but for a bit of a different application, actually, but kind of tied to refi in a way, like I was saying. So using remote sensing to provide credit scores for farmers in developing countries, and also for parametric insurance as well for farmers and other agriculture supply chain companies as well, or companies. So I think there are all these other, so many different opportunities out there, especially when you're exposed to one bit of technology, and in my case it was remote sensing in particular, and you can see the transformational potential impact in some use cases. That makes you think, let's go for it. Let's try and see if we can really push the boundaries and open up a whole new segment. So push and pull, I would say. But Trump's tweets and the soybean market going a little bit down is definitely something I always remember. Take with
Like,
me to my grave.
you know what? I think I'm done. And then you get that moment of like a time period. It's like I'm definitely done with this, but like I don't know where I'm gonna go because like this is all I know how to do. But it's definitely whatever it is, it's not this. I had this as an aside. I had this moment in my Silicon career where I joined this company. I'm not going to say who it was, and like this lady was like a vice president at this company, and the first meeting I had with her was just like an hour of screaming, and she wasn't screaming at me. She was just like angry, like she's just like under all this pressure, and then
Yeah.
afterwards she's like, "Well, thank you. That was very productive." And I was like, do I want to be this person? Like, is that my goal? It's like that's like me becoming her. That's the goal of working here. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to be that stressed out all the time. So,
Yeah, and like, but equally, we have so much kind of optionality in a way as well, right?
yeah,
Which has really been a paradigm shift, I think, really in the last decade. I remember when I was like, in university, you go to career fairs, or if you said in my case, it was a bunch of banks and
yeah.
whatever there set up, and and that was where you went, but and then it evolved to like Web 2, so career fairs, younger generations go to, and you see like the fangs or whatever you call them now there. And now it's just like, you just start your own thing really, right? If you have a great idea, if you could get something together, right? So, um, you know, I think, we're in a good phase now where you have some experience. I've gone down a bit the TradFi route, as you kind of highlighted initially. So, you go in, you learn, first principles finance, or the basics. Let's call it the classics, right? They give you a nice Fibonacci book, fixed income markets. You understand all that stuff. But now you can see it applied in all different use cases as well with Web 3, right? So, I think it's a good place to be in. But you know, let's see, let's survive the winter first and see what comes out the other side, right, Rex?
So you're very much like it's interesting because what you're doing on the commodity side is highly aligned from the work I was doing on the IoT side. It's like you see how the data must be end to end tracked and monitored so that you can have price discovery and figure out what the price should be. And there's all these gaps in what the data ought to be. And then you've got obviously things like Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin doing cannonballs into the situation the whole time. So it's like all this data doesn't exist end to end. So all these things are not priced properly, and that's got to get resolved somehow. And like here you were like just trying to like cobble all these pieces together manually. Like I got my satellite data and Donald Trump's feed, and like and like it's like, well, wouldn't it be nice if all this was like done automatically through like blockchain observers like Chainlink? This is XYO, they do this too. It's like, how come all this isn't settled on some like universal ledger of some sort so that everybody can agree what the data is
Yeah.
of price ought to be? Why is there all this inconsistency? Because as a trader, you're kind of doing this manually. Like you're stitching all these data sources together to try and guess the price, and like your job wouldn't exist if these markets weren't, if this data wasn't so fragmented and impossible to collate, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and that's totally it, right? Like part of the job is that there's market failures that take place. There's a price discovery mechanism, right? So you're kind of just trying to be part of that resolution, right? In that, but yeah, I mean, it is exciting. Yes, there are different data sources you can leverage. I guess if I had to think back of what I probably should have been doing, I probably should have been trying to predict what Donald Trump or President Trump was going to tweet the next day, right? That would have been a good leading indicator of where the soybean price would have been going. But I never managed to delve that deep into it, to be honest, Rex. But I would say, just with my, again, commodities hat on, it's interesting because obviously a lot of the refi focus has been the carbon market, right? And here we have a commodity where it's always been it's a digital commodity for all intents and purposes, right? It just, I used to trade corn and soybeans. I've been to the farms in the Midwest. I've seen in New Orleans, a Panamax of corn or soybeans being loaded to be sent to China. All of these are very physical commodities, right? But in carbon, you have something which is natively digital for all intents and purposes. So, you kind of see that if you had to go to first principles and design a marketplace, then, it does lend itself to be in a kind of blockchain ecosystem anyway. And I think that's where some of the excitement obviously comes from, at least when it comes to some of the TradFi involvement. I think when in the carbon market going on chain, I think, we've had a few missteps. It would be fair to say in the last year or two with that coming to fruition. I think, the refi community could probably also learn a bit more from the people who've been in the carbon markets for the last 20 years, who've dealt with some of the pain points, some of the issues, so that we don't have those rehashed again under different guise in a different venue. So, we need, both the TradFi, the crypto native, all these people kind of to come together, I think, and to design, I guess, the best marketplace, right? And I think that's what we're starting to see anyway, beyond me saying this. So maybe it's, we just had a rough moment initially, but hopefully it kind of resolves itself now.
My goal with doing Refi Summit was trying to try and create a collective place where everybody could come together. I think the refi people loved it for sure, but now we're starting to see the institutions coming around. Like I think Vera and Gold Standard and Google are taking it much more seriously. And ultimately, I'd like to see Microsoft. I see Microsoft has a ton of carbon people on staff, but I haven't seen them showing up in the Web3 spaces yet. I haven't seen Amazon sustainability people showing up in the Web3 spaces yet. So with Refi Summit next year, my hope is that we do get more of those institutional folks to actually come and participate. My other hope is that I think we're moving from a stage of talking to very hands-on developer-oriented building. It's like maybe Geotree, like maybe, I don't know, your product could, a lot of these products are ultimately going to be developer focused. Like, how do I integrate this into my web? How do I integrate these blockchain technologies into what I'm building? Do you see who is Web Geotree's target audience? Like, are you approaching developers? Do you see developers as being interesting market in the future, or like how does that fit in with what you're doing?
Well, I'll say right now we're very much in the Web2 space, and for us, a developer is a carbon project developer, to be honest, right? So we have literally people with boots and shovels, going out, doing the tree planting, getting the finance for that, very much on the ground, talking to local communities, understanding land tenure, legal rights, all these things when it comes to implementing carbon projects. So that's our kind of core base, let's say, people who are going out to really, let's say, regenerate in some way, right? Which is part of what the community is meant to do. I think where we're still looking is how do we best utilize and interact with Web3. Given where we sit in the kind of tech stack, we are obviously on the analytics side. We're pulling in different data sources. We could push that to different contracts as well. We've explored, can we give some Oracle kind of functionality into the system as well? So there are different avenues for us to explore for sure. But to be frank, I think, the carbon market's still too early. that, and there's such a kind of crunch for resource. People really, really pushing to find the best projects at the moment. We have a lot of demand for our services, in a Web 2, even semi-Web 1 kind of way, right? So we're right now laser focused on kind of focusing on servicing that kind of need. But in terms of, yes, being some kind of Oracle, talking to Web 3 developers and bringing some of our analytics on chain, that's definitely something in our roadmap for sure.
It kind of reminds me in some ways of like the transportation industry before Uber showed up. It's like, oh, you've got buses and taxis and limousines and all this like different, like 100 different ways to get from point A to point B. And then there's all these different regulations on a per city and per state and per country basis. And then Uber kind of came in with a universal overlay, and they didn't really ask permission, they just did it. And then
Right.
like it turned out that all these regulators were actually downstream of consumer preference. So if everybody gets used to doing, so they kind of universally defragmented the market for personal transportation. And when I looked into what's involved with all these carbon projects and all the manual elements of it, I'm like,
Oh yeah.
somebody's got to come along and put some kind of, Uber like, experience down on top of that like automates the data collection and rewards people and like rates the carbon producers and like verifies it all. And like I think that's coming, and that's a very, how big is that market? How big is that carbon market, would you say?
Well, I mean, if you just look at the studies at the moment, obviously it's over $1 billion at the moment, annually, but it's meant to scale, depending on who you talk to, 10 to 50x in the next decade, right? I think we can all possibly agree that it is a big potential, exponentially growing market potentially that we're talking about. You're right in terms of all of the infrastructure of the market was designed around the NGO small scale-ish kind of approach. We do have a lot of, still with trees on the ground, measurement taking place, physical soil sampling in the case of agriculture in particular as well. By nature as well, because of the countries you're dealing with, there are a lot of issues around land rights which need to be dealt with as well. So it is a complicated undertaking. But that being said, I will say, and I applaud you for saying that you want to bring in the Veras and all the other people into the tent, so to speak, because I can see that they have started to really move now, right, in
Yeah.
their thinking.
Yeah.
Thinking, oh yeah, can we digitize our standards and use digital MRV and the like? So that whether it's Vera, Gold Standard, others as well in the mix, we're starting to see that kind of
Google
movement
Google is
in place.
showing up. Google is sniffing around.
Yeah. So I think it's great that that's kind of happening. So I have no doubt. I don't know if it will be in the May edition of the summit, but 2023. But some point, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be surprised if at the table you do have Vera on a panel with Gold Standard, with some of the big tech companies out there as well. I don't see why not.
I saw some estimates showing that there's going to be potentially up to 90,000 high skilled tech workers uh, uh, in cut loose by various layoffs at like all these companies. I'm like, where are they going to go? I mean, it's going to be Web3, AI, and climate technology. So I think, some of these areas, like especially the climate tech industry, where there's all this manual process, legacy process still in place, I think the potential to have some more applied technology is very high. And I could see this being, we're going to go into a heavy build period. But coming out of the end of it, I see IoT and climate fused together with Web3 pretty universally. And it seems like the institutions are taking notice. Like the more progressive, forward-looking ones are, and then the ones that just copycat are going to catch on just by maybe following Google. I think ultimately. So I think next year is going to be a completely different game altogether. Are you doing much in Africa? Like, are you seeing much impact in your business in the continent of Africa?
Yeah, definitely. So, we are monitoring and looking at the, pre-feasibility kind of analysis as well for projects in Africa. A good example is we look at afforestation projects in Kenya, where they are working with smallholder farmers to plant trees on plots. And the farmer does benefit from obviously some of the share of the carbon revenue, but also another source of income potentially from the tree crops being grown on their fields. So we do great work there. That's from a Geotree perspective. Manta Labs also does work with on insurance, parametric insurance with farmers in Africa. We're also hopeful to do some sustainable agriculture projects in West Africa, grassland management. I mean, there's huge potential, right? And you know, I think I put on a bit of a development, economics hat on as well, because that was what I did study before I took the dark road, I guess, into finance, Rex. But I think there's huge potential, huge excitement, right? And I guess you see it with people like Mercy Ventures and these kind of groups as well. There's a leapfrog potential of deploying some of these interesting Web3 kind of technologies and approaches and different data sources as well, right? In these kind of environments. This is what Manta Labs was doing when it was using remote sensing to make credit scores for farmers, right? So, this is something where, not a use case in somewhere like the United States, for example, but in places where you're dealing with smallholders who do not have, credit histories, credit cards, all these other things, you leveraging another data source was a huge innovation, right? So we're active in Africa, active in India. India is exciting for us because we do a lot in agriculture, like I was saying. We do rice projects as well. India has, I believe, around 150 million farmers, right? So it is pretty chunky in terms of size. A lot of them smallholders, and we can help with things like reducing the over application of chemical fertilizers, which is a big issue. Also on the rice side, moving them to practices which decrease methane emissions. I mean, rice contributes up to 30% of global methane emissions, which is massive. So there's interventions we can do there, which can help abate those emissions. So I think in all, many different countries globally, and this is the power as well of having these kind of innovations, having Web3, having Web2 even, to be honest. You can go and reach so many people as well and impact on lives. And if you can connect it with carbon markets, for example, that's going to be huge for many people globally. So that's another exciting aspect of the impact as well that we see in the work that we do.
Does Geotree have an offering? One final question: does Geotree have an offering for the refi market? Like, if somebody's building a refi project, like, is there some way to integrate with Geotree?
Yeah. So, and we do have conversations already. Like, have many people who are like tokenizing, carbon credits, whether it's NFTs whether it's on a tree by tree or a bigger area in terms of the carbon as well. We can provide much of the same kind of analytics as you do for off-chain project, right? Or tree planting campaign, right? Ongoing monitoring, making sure, looking at the pre-feasibility, how much carbon you'd expect on this. And that data could obviously be attached to the token as well. So I think that's a way we can interact, being a data layer or data input onto the tokens. Those are conversations we're already having. We have other big visions later on that hopefully can pan out on the Web3 space. But I think just providing that a bit more visibility, bringing those data on chain from the remote sensing perspective, that's a contribution we can make to the ecosystem at large.
Very exciting. Well, thanks for stopping by, and folks can find Jon. What's your Twitter handle?
Jon Pierre. Yeah.
Very cool. I'll copy it in the post when I do it, and really appreciate it. Looking forward to see it Refi Summit 2 next year. And for everyone who doesn't know Jon, you definitely got to go track him down and follow Geotree, because what they're doing is very exciting.
Yeah, thanks for your time, Russ. And congrats again, like I said, on the Refi Summit and bringing the community together. And see you in 2023.
Thank you, and looking forward to it.
All right, cheers, Rex. Thanks.